Can't take back them things you already done. No, you blame things that you do on somebody else. No, but they all see is you need help. But still you try so hard to cover up your games. You try so hard, hoping that one day something gon' change.
Hey, good evening and welcome to Normalizing Atheism and the Brute Facts podcast hosted by 𝘕𝘰𝘳𝘮𝘢𝘭𝘪𝘻. And 𝘕𝘰𝘰𝘳𝘮𝘢𝘭𝘪𝘮 will be out shortly to host the show. We got Dr. Richard Carrier with us tonight, folks.
You spend so much of your life scheming and trying to get over. Got you wondering why you come around. All you get is cold show. Yeah. You try so hard to cover up your games. You try so hard, hoping that one day something gon' change.
Welcome to the Brute Facts podcast with your host and everybody's favorite Christian, 𝘕𝘰𝘰𝘳𝘮𝘢𝘭𝘪𝘻. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Welcome to Brute Facts. Tonight we have a very special guest. I am very honored to have Dr. Richard Carrier. Although I'm a theist, and yes, I believe in Jesus. He's done tremendous amount of work on it. And being a Bayesian epistemologist myself, I admire the Bayesian analysis that he applies to his historical method. Thank you, Pasta Mike, for that wonderful intro, all of the logos and everything that you do. Everybody make sure you go to Normalizing Atheism, and subscribe to Pasta Mike's channel. He's got a lot of good stuff over there, top-notch productions. Real quick, I wanted to say, again, I do have a Patreon. If you look in the description, there's a link there. There's a link to my website. I'm not looking to make any money off of anything here. Just want to try to cover the cost of hosting all of this and the podcast platforms. Also, for future plans, we're not going to be doing as many live shows coming up. I want to work more on some series to kind of bring philosophy to a more of a layman's terms, considering I'm a layman myself. So without further ado, let's bring on the star of the show, Dr. Richard Carrier.
Hey, hi.
How are you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
I am honored to have you on. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up religious? Were you always atheist, agnostic? How do you kind of identify?
Yeah, my backstory is weird, right? I'm different from what most people think. Like a lot of atheists, especially atheist activists, a lot of them, you and I were talking about this back channel before, come from a fundamentalist background, maybe like where they've dealt with a lot of like extreme conservative views and abuse and other things like that. I didn't have that experience, right? I actually had good experience with Christians until I became old enough to vote. And then that's when I ran into, that's when I discovered that the Christian right runs the country, basically, back then, especially, even more so than now. But no, my actual backstory, I grew up in California, Southern California, very liberal, First Methodist family. My parents didn't really require me to believe anything. Like they were like, you should figure it out for yourself and choose. But we went to church. I did Sunday school. I did all of that stuff. But it was a very, very liberal-minded church. Like it was all more about the community and the values, not about biblical literalism. So like in Sunday school, they would teach Bible stories, but they would also teach like Greek myths and things like that. And they would show the comparison. Like the moral of the story is the important thing you're supposed to learn. Like they weren't pushing it. It's like, this has literally happened. Like Jonah actually wasn't a whale. Like that wasn't part of the thing. And the social mission was more liberal minded, more progressive, right? More tolerant, more accepting. So I had generally good experiences with Christians. I would run into the occasional like fundamentalist in high school, and we just thought they were like fringe and weird and had silly beliefs. I remember a friend of mine, his girlfriend in high school, he had her in tears over the fact that he believed that there might be life on other planets. And that was like my introduction to fundamentalism. Like that is a really weird thing to get in tears over.
Absolutely.
Right. So I just thought that was fringe and weird. But when I got politically active, when I started getting more involved, that's when I started encountering like fundamentalism and the impact it has on people's lives. And then it became a problem. But in between, in my teenage years, when I was in high school, I actually converted. The first religion that I had, in the sense that I had faith in it, was Taoism. I actually became a convinced Taoist, and a philosophical Taoist, not like the pagan superstitious magic wielding Taoists, but what was very much a meditative philosophy and very much a psychological philosophy. And so the 𝘕𝘰𝘮𝘬 was the scriptures. And when I went into the Coast Guard, so I was a Taoist until middle of my service. I went into the Coast Guard in 1990. And when I went in, that was my professed religion. So I was my declared religion in my service record, and you're allowed one devotional item in boot camp. And so I took my own hand-scribed 𝘕𝘰𝘮𝘬. I picked my favorite English translation from all the different ones. And so I had my own 𝘕𝘰𝘮𝘬 that I had transcribed. That was my Bible in boot camp. So that's how Taoist I was, right? And I had religious experiences and lots of things that really were convincing me that Taoism was true. Like all the things that you hear from Christians talking about, like, it made my life so much better. I was so much happier, right? Like, had all those impacts that Christians talk about. And so that gave me a different perspective. And I got out of it not by like being bad or anything like necessarily. I just realized like, actually, these experiences I'm having, I'm kind of, all right, I lost internet for a second there.
You're back. That is a fantastic screenshot that we have of you right there when it froze. Yeah. So you started to be bad. That's
oh, right. Yeah. No. And so, it was just that I realized that it was false, in the sense that I was fooling myself into believing it, and that it was a human philosophy. It had good ideas and bad ideas, and that I should approach it that way. And then once I realized that it was false, and then I was a seeker. And then Christian on a naval base asked me to read the Bible, and I said, I'll read the whole Bible. And I read the whole Bible, and that's made me an atheist. By the time I finished the Bible cover to cover, I said, yeah, I'm an atheist. And so then it was a question, well, then what is true? And so for me, it wasn't just a question of rejecting religion at that point. I had a very useful worldview up to that point. And so I was like, well, if Taoism is false, what is true? And so there's more of a worldview theory. So that's when I got very much in. That's when I started writing my book that became Sense and Goodness Without God, published in 2005. Like I was writing it on my ship and while in the Coast Guard, right? But it changed many times as I learned more and more, because I kept studying these things. And so it evolved completely. So by the time it published in 2005, it was a much more developed philosophy. But my approach was Aristotelian kind of way of approaching it. Is like, well, epistemology, metaphysics, politics as philosophy, aesthetics as an important part of your worldview. You should be able to integrate all these things. And so I was always looking at it from the perspective of positive belief. Like what should atheists believe in, rather than what belief should they reject? And so that has really changed. I think it's sent me on different trajectories than a lot of atheists and a lot of atheist activists. So that's sort of the nutshell version of my story.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's so much there. First of all, I thought I knew pretty much everything about you, but I didn't know you were in the Coast Guard. So thank you for your service.
Yeah. You're welcome. I don't regret having done it. It was excellent and worth doing. So
yeah, definitely appreciate that. And the politics part of it is actually, I grew up, my backstory is kind of weird too. I grew up in a fundamentalist family that weren't really practicing Christians, but they sent us to church on Sunday mornings for Sunday school as kids. So we had developed this idea and worldview that we just assumed was true. And even into, late teens, until I really got interested in, science and all these different things, and saw all of these false dichotomies. But one thing that you stated there that really hits home with me is the political part of it. And that is because I went from my mother, pretty much, for a long time, raised 3 teenage boys with, little help. And she was a hippie. And, I had been introduced to LGBT couples and minorities and things at a very young age. So we had no issue with accepting people. And that was one of her mantras was, you love everybody, no matter who they are.
That's
You
pretty
don't
cool.
judge
Yeah.
anybody. Oh, she rocked it. She's a pothead too, but which there's nothing wrong with that. But so when I got married and had kids and really got into politics, I swung hard right. I started listening to Rush Limbaugh because I hated him and didn't know anything about him. And then I was like, wait a minute, started buying into all this and kind of swung hard right. And when they wanted to, they're supposed to be conservatives and constitutionalists and all these different things, and they wanted to change the Constitution to define marriage. And that's when I started to realize that, it's all about who's in power. And because they had preached so long about don't mess with the Constitution, like it's this holy document and all these different things. But when it came up for an issue for them that they thought would benefit their ideology, so that's kind of when I hopped off the train. And ever since then, I've been pretty libertarian. I'm social left, a little fiscal right, more about as moderate as you can get on most things. But it had a huge impact on my deconstruction, because I went through a deconstruction like a lot of atheists go through. So it's pretty cool to hear the political part of it. That's
actually really valuable to have gone through. It's funny, you reminded me of another side of that story that I didn't get into much, which was the political side. I actually did a similar thing, but secularly. So I started out very early on when I was getting political. I was very Marxist. I was definitely a Marxist. Then an objectivist, classic Ayn Rand objectivist, convinced me of that. And so I became an objectivist, the exact opposite of a Marxist for a while. And then I realized that was all baloney. And so I went through all of this process. So I was convinced of these worldviews and bought into them, lived them, but then realized they were false and got out of them, but have done all of these things. So that now when I'm in the middle and I'm thinking like, oh, okay, I started out for many years not having this kind of arrogant confidence that I must be right. So I'm always very much fact checking. So while I was a convinced Marxist once, so I can be wrong about things. I was a convinced objectivist once, so I can be wrong about things. So I took very seriously why do I have confidence in a thing, right? So I need to have good reasons and they have to be objective reasons. And I'm always concerned about not fooling myself into believing something. And so that has affected me a lot in deciding my trajectory and where I've ended up in places. And people interact with my work now, they see it like it's very arrogant and very this is the position and stuff. But it took a long time to get there. So the only positions they see that on are the ones that I'm confident in. But the ones that I'm not confident in, I'm not, writing confident articles about. Those I'm still working out. And the ones that I am confident, that's decades in the making, right? And I've probably swung many different directions on that issue before I got there. And so hearing your story, I see affinity there. That's a similar thing. Like you've been through the different phases, and so you know what it's like to be in that mindset. And so now you're like thinking like, well, okay, let's figure out what is true, and then how you do that, right, it becomes important. And I think that matters a lot to how people end up in a better place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the second part of that was you were talking about the spiritual moments that the religious experiences you had.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk to people about I try to be as honest as possible with and as objective as possible, because I really want to know what is true about the reality that we live in. So when I usually don't talk about religious experiences, but when I do, I always preface it with, it fits into my worldview. That is very important when we're trying to objectively evaluate things. Now, I didn't have any crazy ones, but there's also meditation can create what is like religious experience. Drugs can create, and I did my share of drugs, and so I've had my religious experiences there too, which the ones that I consider religious experiences. But if I was to become, because I was agnostic for not a long period of time, I've just always had this, I would at least be, and I tell this, a lot of times to people, is I would at least be a deist, just because,
right.
Kind of like the Plantinga thing, I've just always had this belief or idea that there's something bigger, which totally could be because of my upbringing. And I realize these things. And so I try to evaluate things as objectively as possible. And I'm probably one of the few theists that's actually a fan of your work, because it makes us think objectively about things. You approach it, of course, being, I love, Bayesian epistemology, Bayesian analysis, and all of this.
Yeah,
so
you mentioned that. I'm solidarity.
Yeah.
I apply it to more things than just the history subject too, right? I apply it to my philosophy and everything like that. Because that was a eureka moment. I was an anti-Bayesian for a while. That's another example. I was trying to argue with someone and refuting it, and it was like mid-argument, I realized I was wrong. And then it was like, there was that like eureka moment where you're like, holy crap, you're like, everything opens up and you're like, oh my God, this explains everything. And so, yeah, not a lot of people have that epiphany moment and get it. So it's cool to meet someone else.
Yeah. I actually came to the realization that I was Bayesian in my analysis and didn't even know it. Because
that's most people really are, right? So like, yeah.
So when I started learning about, the Bayesian probability and Bayesian analysis, and my wife will, tell you that I flew for my company. The first few years that I worked at this company, man, I was, gold and platinum with most airlines because they were just so shorthanded. And she is deathly afraid of flying. And she's like, how do you do it? And I would recite to her statistics, how many flights go out a day versus how many actually crash or have these different things. I found comfort in statistics. And so the more that I learned about, probability in general, the more I realized I've been living most of my life finding comfort in statistics, so I'm a Bayesian guy.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it kind of just fit fantastic with it. So kind of turning on that, what made you decide to, because for the people who don't know, which I doubt there's anybody here who doesn't know your credentials, you are definitely someone who is credentialed to write on things such as the historicity of Jesus and things, because a lot of people who take your position don't have the credentials, and you really have the education to back it up. And what sold me on you was your debate with Craig.
Oh, really? Yeah, the resurrection debate, right?
Yeah,
Washburn, I believe. Yeah, people can find that video online. I might do just a side thing. I just got a transcript of it. I might do a rescoring of that debate coming up. It's on my list of things to do. But yeah, go on. I'm interested to hear what your take on was.
So being at that time a Craig fanboy, as most philosophy of religion theists are today, I kind of had a unique perspective because I'm one of the few theists who liked. I'm drawing a blank. The Four Horsemen, the first one.
Well, there's Hitchens, Dennett.
Hitchens, yes.
Right.
So
yeah.
when Hitchens, just because of when I went through my angry anti-fundamentalist phase, was about the same time that I had discovered, debating and philosophy of religion, these different things. And a lot of my theists or Christian friends are like, "Oh, he's so terrible." And when I listened to him, the fact that he had, to be blunt, he had the balls to go after organized religion, the church, especially European and these things. I totally admired that. And, philosophical, people can talk about whether philosophically or not he was real sound. I loved his tenacity. So having become recently a Craig fanboy, when I had saw the debate, regardless of, the content that was there, I was really taken aback by the confidence that you had. I thought that you were a very good rhetorician. You were very quick. You were very, it was one of the best back and forths as far as giving Craig, a hard time.
Someone after the fact, like there were things, there were like a lot of unfinished threads in that debate, right? So I felt like I dropped some balls because they ran out of time, right? The clock ended. But someone came up to me and pointed out to me, like, you had him on the ropes the whole time, like no one else has. And you know how we know this is usually in a debate, Craig has completely dispatched his opponent, rhetorically at least, right? And then he has time at the end to evangelize the audience, right? He can actually burn clock just pitching the religion, right? Like he's not even doing the debate anymore. And in mine, he was arguing down to the last second, right? So he didn't have time for that. And then there was someone in the audience, and someone said it was Mike Licona, but I don't know if this is true. But there was someone in the audience during Q&A, pitched him the ball and said, "Oh, we noticed that you didn't get to evangelize. Could you maybe take the opportunity to do that now?" And so in Q&A, he got to do it, which I thought that was fascinating thing. But yeah, I definitely had him like having to argue down to end of clock, which is, if you notice, that doesn't commonly happen. So that is true. We were pretty equally matched, I think, in terms of our rhetorical skills.
Agree. Absolutely, I would agree because knowing what I know, because my main area is philosophy, and I'm total layman, but I've spent a lot of years. I ended up in a very high quality philosophy group about 10 or 12 years ago, and all of the new up and coming superstars were in there, and I didn't know it, and it was a year before I could even talk in there. Because I didn't know what they were talking about. So I did get a pretty good trial by fire in education. And knowing what I know now, there's a lot of technicality and philosophical weight to different debates, like Hitchens, like I was talking about with Hitchens, he just kind of took it to Craig. But technically, Craig was, in my opinion, superior given my, understanding of philosophy. And I thought that Craig, pretty much every debate he was in, it was like rinse and repeat, because he would bring the same things, and people would bring up these different points that really didn't attack it. So when I got to see the debate with you guys, and then later on Sean Carroll, I love the debate.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Yeah, that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, there's not many debates there that I put in the win column from Craig, just because of the technicalities of it. But Carroll is definitely up there. Shelley Kagan is definitely up there. Your debate
it's worth a shout out to Kagan, because that was a very technical debate. So I think a lot of people don't watch it or can't or not as into it, because it was very, very a deep philosophical debate, like full on. And that was another example of where Kagan did get the better of Craig on that. I think Kagan was right. Also, that's another side of it. But I mean, even apart from that, because I actually, it's funny you might find this weird to hear. I actually hate debates. I'm good at them.
You were pretty good at it.
Yeah, I'm good at them, and I'll do them because I study the skill of it, right? So like I take seriously, debate is in and of itself a skill. And Craig was a professional debater even before he became evangelical missionary, right? So he's bringing like literally professional debate skills to the table. And I think a lot of people who think, well, I can just go and argue with him and that'll be fine. It's like, no, there's really specific skills going on here that you need to have. This can be used for good or evil, right? So I find like clocked debates have the disadvantage that it's more about rhetoric than getting to the truth. And to give you an example of that, like if people watch my first debate with Mike Licona, I definitely had him on the facts all the way through and certain aspects of rhetorical moving and so on. But it was our second debate that I thought was the most useful debate. And because we agreed, now our opening statements were still the standard combative podium debate, but everything after that, we sat in comfy chairs, and the goal of the debate was to understand why the other person believed what they did, rather than to win, right? So we actually had a much more productive, interesting discussion in that debate, in our second debate. And it was funny because a lot of Christians came to see combat. They came to see Licona slam me down, that kind of, they wanted to see war, and they want to see victory. They didn't want to see mutual understanding. But in my opinion, that was actually one of the most productive debates that I had with someone that I had with a Christian, certainly. And I've had other, I've had debates. I did a debate with an atheist on moral theory, for example. So I've had debates that weren't Christian aligned, but where the debate actually went in productive directions. Like we were actually both interested in trying to get somewhere rather than trying to outmaneuver the other, embarrass the other, show up the other or whatever. And I don't like having to do that. Right. So I prefer like an informative educational debate, which is why I prefer written debates, because it gives both of us time to really parse our words, to really fact check, to put some references in. And so I've been using a new format where it's like 1,100 words or more, not very short entries, but you just go, so that people don't get like bored with TLDR. They just see, here's the case, but there's so many entries that it's not like you're losing the opportunity to make a point. You get that opportunity eventually, right? So the debate actually goes somewhere and it's more academic, I find. So oral debates, I don't like them. I know people love them. They're entertaining, and they do bring a lot of people in, like they fill seats. So for educational purposes, that's how I approach debates. So this is my opportunity to tell people things that they won't have heard before. And then my hope is that they'll go research them themselves. That they won't just trust me, but they'll go fact check. So that's how I approach debates, and also to outmaneuver the whatever tricks are being pulled. So, so I know how to do that. And so I think that's why I took the skill of debate seriously when I debated Craig. And I think that's what produces a more interesting debate that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you were most definitely prepared for it. Because like, everybody else, like I said, even after that debate, there were so many people, it's like rinse and repeat. It's like, what he's going to say. But like you said, it's like a professional soccer player, playing against soccer against a high school, because it's an art, and that's my thing is I'm not a good rhetorician. So, I mean, I like debating. I think basically just for the sport and the fun of it. But, I grew up having to fight a lot. So I think it's just kind of like an intellectual fight now.
Right.
But you had mentioned Licona, and I'm actually a pretty big fan of his, not because or just because he's a theist, but because when I read his last book on the evidence for the resurrection, the attempt at being objective, understanding his bias, wanting the facts to fit, and all these things that he made extremely clear in it, I pride myself on being intellectually honest. So when I hear people come from
Licona definitely is, right? So that's one thing about him for sure, which got him into trouble. But that, like, some people did like stand up for him when he actually was willing to say, that there might be stuff in the Bible and the Gospels that is allegorical and not literal, like, which shock, which should be where Christianity has gone by now. Like, the fundamentalism has really been destructive to Christianity as a faith and as a worldview. And so I don't think, like, fundamentalists, they don't see it that way. Craig would not agree with me, but I think it's been a big problem. Whereas Licona is, like, willing to say, you know what, why don't we accept that there's allegory here? We don't have to take this literally. And, and then, the Sharks came out against him on that, but he's landed well since, so he's all right. But that showed me, like, he was willing to, like, be honest, basically, rather than try to toe a party line. And so that I do like about him, and he's good company. I've hung out with Licona a few times, so he's a good guy.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of. I think him and Bart Ehrman are, like, really good friends because they go after each other pretty good. When they
do they? I actually haven't seen Licona and Ehrman interact. Okay, I didn't know this.
Yes, they have to be hanging out at somewhere else beforehand and afterwards. And they say they are good friends, but I like Bart because I'm skeptic by nature, and Bart he's all about it. Just because he's not a believer doesn't mean I'm going to discount his work.
Yeah. And a lot of what he does, though, is just communicating mainstream consensus, right, to the public, which he's really good at. That's, like, he's really good at that. And no one had done that before really effectively. And he does it better than anybody. So, like, Jesus Interrupted, in, like, how to popularize an idea versus academics, you look at his Forgery and Counterforgery, which is a solid peer-reviewed academic monograph on ancient forgery in relation to the Christian tradition. And then he wrote the popular book Forged, which is a really good popularization, just a quick summary for everybody. And if you want to dive deeper, you've got Forgery and Counterforgery. You can go in and get the footnotes and all of that stuff. So he's really good at that kind of thing. And I think sometimes people treat him as he's this fringe radical, that he's another Shelby Spong. And it's like, no, he's super mainstream.
He absolutely
you just don't know that those are the mainstream views. You've been told, from the pulpit or whatever. Like, a lot of Christians think that conservative Christianity is the mainstream, but it's conservative mainstream.
Oh my God! You know what? With a lot of these guys that I have in the chat now, I've been trying to tell them for so long, this North American Puritan literal principle fundamentalist Christianity is not the norm. The Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church, Episcopalian, none of them hold to inerrancy of Scripture. None of them hold to this literal principle. It's literature. Let's approach it as literature, and we can try to, with textual criticism and all these other tools, then we can look at it and see maybe what they were trying to convey. We don't have to come with this fundamentalist Puritan approach that we have here in the U.S. And unfortunately, one thing that I, make clear to them all the time is in the U.S., the masses are really ignorant about church history, doctrine, and things. And the fundamentalists are the loudest, and they are the public evangelizers. So this is what they hear.
They got the money.
What they
adopt.
Right. Yeah. So they take in all these views that they don't realize aren't the main view in Christianity worldwide, nor historically.
And I think this is changing. We noticed, like, if you know the trend of the last 20 years, like the rise, there's the percentage of atheists in the U.S. is significantly increased. But if you look at the stats, it is actually, if you look at what they call the nuns, right, the people who say no religion, has hugely increased. But half the people who split nun, half of them go atheist. The other half are still religious. They're just saying to hell with this organized religion stuff, right? So, and they're going their own path. Many of them are Christians, but they might not answer Christian on a poll because of the humility aspect of it. It's like, I'm not going to, like, claim this political status. I have my religious beliefs. I am no religion. But then when people start asking, well, you believe this, you believe this, you believe this, you can show, like, well, technically this person is a Christian, but they're not answering as Christian. And that's increased significantly at the same rate as atheism has increased in the last 20 years. So I do see in a sense that the fundamentalist hold on this waning, but it's still super powerful. They still control a lot of stuff, but it is waning, which actually kind of explains a lot of the desperate moves that they've been engaging in to try and maintain power. Like they're getting more louder, more combative, more angry, and that's like there's the political commentator Fareed Zakaria points this out for Islam is the same way. It's like when you see these violent Muslim radicals, like that's the death throes of fundamentalist Islam, like because their arguments no longer work, so that all they have left is violence. And the people they're killing mostly are other Muslims. So like most of what they're doing is killing what they see as progressive Muslims. The Muslims going in a future direction, they're busy killing them most of the time, and then occasionally they come and kill some of us, and then we get angry. It's like we're not noticing, like, well, maybe we could have done more to help like the liberal progressive movements in Islamic countries before all of this happened. But it's we can still do that now. But at the same time, we've got like I said, the double split. We've got rising atheism, we've got rising people leaving organized Christianity, but still trying to find a path for it. And I've mentioned this before, but I've done many debates. I used to talk to Christian youth groups. They would, they bring me in. There was an organization. It's now run by McDowell's son, Sean. But before it was someone else. But I've done gigs for Sean as well, where they'd bring me in. I would give a lecture on something to Christian students, high school students usually, and then the Christians would Q&A me, and I'm sure what really happened is I would come and do that, and I would leave, and then they would try to inoculate them against everything I just said. But I still at least got to get my ideas out there, and I remember like having conversations with a lot of these kids, and one of the biggest problems with evangelical, especially white evangelical, that particular section of America, they're hemorrhaging youth. People are leaving, right? So their future is doomed if they don't do anything about this. A lot of hand-wringing books written about what to do about this. But I'm talking to some of these Christians who were going to leave. They're like Jesus freaks of the 60s. Like their attitude was like, look, you're up here on the pulpit talking about, condemning gay marriage and abortion. We want to go feed the poor and like solve social justice issues. Like we want to go do Jesus-y things is the way they put it. And it's like, and that's why they're not getting that, right? Like that's why they're leaving. And I read this one book, and I went to this creationist museum. I've been to the big one, the Kentucky one, but I went to this other one, a small one. And they're at a little bookstore, and they had a whole book on this. What do we do about the youth leaving the church? And their whole program was get more biblical, get more literal, get more fundamentalist. And I'm like, yes, you absolutely do that, because that is going to drive them all away, because that is what they're running from, right? That is what they don't want. Like they really get the sort of liberal Jesus idea, like that is really popular and really resonates and can motivate and lead to like really interesting, cool social stuff, like advanced society, right? In a good way. And I think there's more freedom to do that now. Like the youth can say, to hell with you, I can follow Jesus in my own way now, right? And there's more of and I think in a way, like atheists have kind of paved the way for that, like by pushing for atheist recognition as just not evil commies, not Satan worshipers. Like you remember, like the 80s, it was like atheism was bad, right? And it took a while for atheism to become like, oh, it's okay to be an atheist. So, but I think that also gave permission for Christians to say, you know what, I don't have to be this kind of Christian. I can be the kind of Christian I want to be. And I think that has been a positive development as well. And so I'm rooting for the Christian youth who I want to do Jesus things. I like those people because we often agree on what we need to be doing to fix the problems in society. And those are the people I can work with.
Right. Absolutely. And that's, it's funny because I actually had some Christians who tried to, I guess they thought that it was a pejorative to call me a red letter Christian.
Red letter Christian?
Yeah, because
I get it. Okay, I haven't heard that before, but that's right. Okay, I understand the metaphor.
So, because one of the jokes is, if my view is not a heresy, then I need to review my view. Because I don't buy into church dogma. Now, I do put stock into, a historical perspective. I do put stock into, the great minds of the past, whether they're theological, philosophical, I do take all of that into account. But an organization who has a vested interest in me following their version, and just because they want to throw around this word heresy, I'm like, I don't care. that doesn't matter. I want to know what it has to make sense to me. You can't tell me that, like right now, I'm very agnostic on the Trinity view. I'm leaning more towards a Unitarian view. And the Christians are like losing their minds. They're just like, no, and I'm
yeah,
like,
right. And that's always fascinated me, because there's not inherently any moral or ideological reason
it's
to
just
be
heresy.
so right. It's to be so obsessed with the Trinity, like defending that concept.
Right.
It's like, as if we were to admit that they were different, for example, it's that Jesus was a man who was inspired by the Spirit of God, like they weren't identical. Like, what does that actually? It doesn't really do anything harmful to your religion, but what it does is it goes against the authority. Like the authority's banked its position on this thing, and if you say that they're wrong about that, well, they could be wrong about everything, and so they lose all their social power. And so I think that very much is an institutional thing, which is why, like the Nicene Creed, that was a political committee created by a tyrannical emperor specifically for the purpose of unifying the church under his political goals, right? So it's the Christians to venerate the Nicene Creed is like almost the darkest of ironies in history. Is like, you should have completely repudiated that creed by now. You should say like, oh, that would be like the Nazi Party getting Christians together and telling them pick a church. Right. And then, they pick a church and they go, we're going to go with that as the correct thing. Is like, actually, you should be the most suspicious of that result of anything that's happened in Christian history. But there were all these other Christian movements at the time that were being denounced by the Nicene Council. They were legitimate Christian movements. Like, why should you just say that they were wrong? And so, yeah, I think the whole obsession with the Nicene Creed does surprise me, I must say. For it still to be the case, and for it to be historical, like the idea of paying attention to history, that's the one thing Christians should be quickest to get rid of. It's like, we don't really need that. It doesn't have anything to do with, like you said, the red letter stuff, right?
Right, absolutely.
There's nothing in there that requires you to believe in the Trinity, right? So it becomes this distraction. It becomes this tool. It's a shibboleth, right? It's a device for social control. Like, you either buy this or you don't. If you don't, you're suspect. You're a pinko commie, whatever. You're an enemy of everything. If you're not willing to buy this one thing that we're selling you. And so that is what makes institutional religion pernicious, which you've discovered. And it is good to see Christians realizing that and getting out. And we're seeing that more and more, I think, which is a positive development.
I mean, no clearer statements are, feed the poor, take care of the widow, take care of the orphans. The people that Jesus was angry with was the religious crowd. Jesus was the most angry. So even if let's say that the Jesus of the Bible didn't exist, let's say that Jesus was just a another Pharisee, and he was this very philosophical and theological Jew. If we could just look at him as a humanitarian and look at the things that he had said, about the people, he was with the worst of the worst. He was, the churches, the religious are the ones that made him angry. He was with of all people, expert here. Tax collectors were just completely, they were terrible people, and prostitutes and all these different people. And he was accused time and time again of, hanging out with these sinners and these non-Jews.
And he, as he says in the story, like, these are the people who need me. Right. It's like, this is why I'm hanging out with them. Like, I'm not endorsing what they do necessarily, but that's it's like missing the message. And I would even translate that. So, like, we've hinted at a few times, so my infamous status as a mythicist, right? Someone who thinks, and to say, like, I actually conclude that the upper percentage chance, the upper odds for Jesus existing as an actual rabbi, like you're talking about, is 1 in 3, which is still a decent percentage. So even though I think odds are that he was a made-up character, ultimately, I still think there's a chance that there was a guy. But it doesn't matter, right? So, like, even if, let's take the Gospel of Matthew, because most of what the red letter stuff is that people teach really comes from Matthew. Like the Sermon on the Mount is a classic example. The Luke's version is just a rewrite of Matthew's. So the Sermon on the Mount, right? Even if, as Dale Allison has published, many scholars have published the point that was probably written by a group of Jewish Torah observant Christians after the Jewish War. It was not something that Jesus sat down and taught. But that shouldn't matter, right? So like you're talking about like philosophical rabbinical logic. You don't need a particular single guy to be the hero who says every correct thing. You can have a committee of rabbis that comes up with an important and valuable way of formulating what they think are good values. And so if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of that is apocalyptic teachings, right? So a lot of like the resist nothing, like let someone enslave you, let someone kill you, don't fight back. And all of that stuff is apocalyptic in the sense that the whole world's going to be melted soon. So it doesn't really matter. Don't risk sinning by fighting back is the whole point. It's like, don't risk it. Just, it doesn't matter. Like you're going to live forever in paradise. So who cares how abused you are for the next 50 years? 50 years is nothing. Right. So like that was the attitude behind it, which is what I disagree with. But the positive angle of it is what are we talking about as what is potential sin here? What are we talking about? What are the crimes being portrayed here? What is being portrayed as the thing we ought to do? And it's all compassion oriented, right? Ultimately, it's like don't use violence. Don't sue people unless you have a good reason to, right? Jesus says don't sue them at all because there might be a risk that you've sinned in doing so. But that's extreme. But I think like the idea of being forgiving, like the idea of forgiveness, the idea of caring for the people who are suffering, the poor, recognizing the poor is not lazy. I think there was someone threw a Kleistron underneath about that. Jesus didn't go around teaching that the poor are poor because they deserved it, right? Like, those criminals, they deserve it. No, he's like, no, like they're wayward or they've been downtrodden, they've been oppressed, they've hit hard times. We could. There's a lot of ways we could have sympathy for them, and even when he does like the widow's mite story. Even if these are stories being made up and not something one guy said, it doesn't matter. Someone said it, right? Someone wrote it down, and they were promoting this as their ideal. So even if you see even if Jesus is a myth, the people are representing him in the Gospels as their ideal man, right? Like they're saying, like this is what we're teaching you. Our values, what we think humanity should be doing, through the vessel of this representation. So it doesn't actually matter whether he was a real guy or not. What matters is this correct? Like, is this the ideal you should follow? And it doesn't matter if there's a real guy. And so you can still take what you're talking about, this philosophy aspect of it, this rabbinical philosophy, as like, what can we get out of this that is actually correct? What is the correct direction here? And like you're saying, like, yeah, it is all compassion for the poor and the downtrodden and the oppressed. It is not, let's go beat up abortion providers. Like that's not in there, right? Let's condemn, let's kill the gays. Like there's actual candidates in the US that have run on a platform of executing gay people. Like that has happened within the last 20 years. Like it's not that long ago. And they'd get like 100,000 votes or something. So that's a lot of people. That's not in there, right? Like the ideal man that the Gospels are portraying is not doing that. The most he's doing, like he does over condemn some people for things that they shouldn't be condemning them for, like blasphemy, for example. So their ideal is, in my opinion, is not a perfect ideal. There are problems there. I think Jesus is not depicted as the greatest guy, in my view. But if you're going at it looking for, I want to find the ideal person in this, you can find it, right? So you can actually get that out of there. And so people who focus on the compassionate, positive sides of it, I think are going to be helping humanity move forward into a better place, generally, like for all of us. And so I would wish more Christians to do that. I'm just disappointed that there's so many not doing that and doing the opposite of that. But you have the same frustration I see. So
yeah, absolutely. It's that this whole idea of going out and having this. First of all, let's just, for the sake of argument, concede that Jesus existed, was a real person, and we're looking at the whole New Testament. Almost all of it is written to the church. So when they go out in public, and it specifically says that the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing, or there's a veil that hasn't been lifted, yet they have this need to go out into the public and point out specific sins that they think is a sin and they don't suffer from. And that's what makes me so angry with them targeting LGBT, with them targeting different groups. I'm pro-life, but this is when a mother is facing this decision, that is not something that's taken very lightly by her or anyone around them. The worst possible thing in the world you can do is condemn her. She needs love. She needs to be, she needs to feel that love. She needs somebody reaching out to her. She doesn't need condemnation. And that's what makes me so angry about the fundamentalists. And to bring it, full circle, they have such an impact on politicians that it absolutely just, and as well as I do, most of these politicians don't give two damns about what version of Christianity is right, this, that, or the other. They're just trying to get elected. They don't
money and votes, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So when Jesus went out and loved the world and was a doctor for the sick and didn't come for those who were well and didn't go out pointing out all of these sins except to the religious people, for some reason they have this idea in this country that we're supposed to go out and tell people that you're sinning, you need to repent. That is totally antithetical to what Christ taught. So if you're going to be a Christian, then you need to follow Christ, and obviously I would disagree about the, Christ and this and that, but you're far more advanced in that area to go back and forth about.
Well, I've made this point on my blog more than once, but at least once, is that the contemporary fundamentalist, or even let's just say evangelical, movement in America, that causes most of the problems, I think, really. They're actually worshiping the Antichrist, and I can actually make an internally sound argument from the perspective of a Christian. And if you think of what these ideas meant, like what did the Antichrist mean? It means the opposite of Christ. Right, that's literally what the Greek means, and it did mean, like, if you think of Christ as a spirit, not a literal spirit necessarily, it just means like the ideal I was talking about, like being Christ-like is following a particular ideal, being, like you said, being like Christ, doing what Christ did. Right, he hung out, like you said, with sinners. The only people he got angry with and condemned, angrily, other than like he yells at Peter unfairly. But, apart from that, like he's mostly spending his time ragging on the religious elite, the conservatives, the people who are the upper class, the hypocrites who pray in public. This is another example. So Jesus teaches, like, you hypocrites, you pray in public just to, like, show off, like, how faithful you supposedly are. And then Jesus goes on and says, no, you pray in a closet. Praying is between you and God. Like, if you're trying to show off, you're trying to do public stuff, that's a red flag right there. Like that is exactly what I don't approve. I think it's between you and me, right? So you go into the closet and do between you and God, right? That's the prayer. And then he goes out of, this is the character in the book gospel specifically says this, like, this is the arc of the story. Is like, no, public prayer is hypocritical and proper prayer is private and not public. So what do we see in the conservative Christian movement is pushing for public prayer. And that's kind of died out, but there was a big period between like the 80s and the late 90s where they were really pushing for public prayer, fighting in court to get public prayer, like force people to do public prayer. They're still doing public prayer in Congress, like all of this stuff. But if that's what they're backing the Antichrist. They're backing the opposite of Christ, the different spirit. And you can do like war, like pro-war Christians. That is an Antichrist, right? That Christ, Jesus was turn the other cheek, let him beat you, let him kill you, shoot you in the head. Doesn't matter. You go to heaven. What do you care, right? Like that was Jesus's perspective, or as the character is written. So if you're pro-war, if you're pro-violence, you're pro keeping a baseball bat by the side of your bed, you're pro keeping a vicious dog in the backyard. That's very Antichrist, right? You're worshiping the Antichrist. You go down the list, like attitudes towards the poor. You can pick any issue. Evangelical Christianity is on the side of the opposite of Christ. They're actually worshiping the Antichrist. And of course, they'll never hear this. They won't listen to me on this because I'm an atheist. Because I'm not an authority. I have no credibility in this case. But as a historian, I'm telling
Phonetic fallacy. Go ahead.
Yeah, but as a historian, I can say this. Like this would be the concept of the earliest Christians, right? The earliest Christians were very much radicals. They were very egalitarian. They were very communistic, right? They were like, their idea was to create, and if you get this from Paul especially, you get a little bit of it in the Acts, is the idea is we're going to create a community. We can't conquer the Romans. We can't end injustice in the material world. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our own little community within a community. We'll obey the laws, not getting any conflicts, but we'll do our own thing. And we will create the support network for everybody who's poor, the widow, and all of this stuff. We will support each other and create this sort of like egalitarian, communitarian system and wait it out until God comes and melts everybody. Like that was the original Christian mission. Yeah. And of course it gets institutionalized. It gets turned into like classicism is pushed there, recreating hierarchy. So the church is now we're going to support the upper class over the lower class. We're going to support men over women. We're, like all the standard stuff came back. But that was the later institutionalization of Christianity. The original movement was very much like getting rid of all of that. That was their idea. So I'm always happy to see when Christians are willing to go back to that. The original, like, let's get rid of these oppressive ideas and be much more egalitarian, much more mutually supportive, and create a community within a community. And of course, their idea, like if you were to realize it in the Marxist sense, is like if everybody did this, it would fix the world, right? That's the dream in a sense. But you have to deal with, all the fundamentalist Christians in your way.
And for all of the fundamentalist Christians out there, Marx was a Jew. So.
Hey, gentlemen,
right. As was Jesus, but
yeah, exactly.
I want to sneak in here real quick, and we got a couple of questions. We're hitting on the hour.
Okay,
excellent conversation, and we've got quite a lively following right here. Shout out to Captain Dadpool. He did mention this earlier. I thought it was pretty funny. He said he's 50-50 at the moment. He's on the fanciest. So he's atheist, by the way, but he said he's not really convinced of the mythicism thing, but he's on his way there. Shout out to Godless Engineer and Derek from Myth Vision Podcast for stopping by, some heavy hitters, and a lot of other folks. A little bit too many to mention at the moment. Now,
well, if we've got some questions, we can run long. We can go ahead and just do that gratis and keep going for a bit. So if you've got some Q&A, we can bounce that around.
Okay, so question from Iron Chartier. Let's see. Ask Dr. Carrier, if Jesus is a myth, would that make Paul the founder of Christianity?
Of course not. So Galatians 1-2 is probably one of the most useful 2 chapters of the whole attention to in Galatians. And it comes up in 1 Corinthians 15 as well, the early part of that chapter, that Paul was a latecomer. He actually joined the religion and changed it. Now, the changes he made created a sect that actually ended up being the descendant of all, or the ancestor of all current sects of Christianity. The original sect of Christianity died out. The original sect of Christianity was Torah observant. They were Jews. They believed in following the aspects, like the temple part of it, but they were very much be kosher. Like they were actually going along circumcised, all of this stuff. Got to be a proper Jew to be Christian. Paul came along and said, you don't have to convert to Judaism to be a Christian. Anybody can join. And then of course Gentiles flooded the church and they took over, and basically the Jewish church got sidelined and squashed ultimately. But he was a latecomer. So if you look at Paul's account of things, it was Peter primarily, maybe a little bit of James and John, who were brothers of each other according to the Gospels anyway, and possibly that's true, that they were called the pillars. Paul refers to them as the pillars, meaning the people who founded the church, the people who were holding up the church, essentially. It was Peter, James, and John. And so these are the original people who originally claimed to have visions of Jesus, claiming to have risen from the dead and be the Messiah, etc. So they started the religion. They started it as this little Jewish sect within Judaism as a whole. Paul was a persecutor of them. He says he persecuted the church for a while. It doesn't say how long or what exactly he did. He doesn't actually say he killed anyone or what he did. But he was a persecutor, and he switched sides. He said, I'm wrong. I'm going to join this church. I think this church has got a good idea. he phrases it as Jesus appeared to me and convinced me to join, which might be true. Or he might have realized that he was wrong to be opposing this movement. He might have agreed with the social moral values of this movement and switched sides. So so he was a latecomer to it. But he did make this key innovation, which is that you don't have to be Jewish to be Christian. So that when people talk about Christianity, you're mostly thinking of it as a Gentile religion. You're thinking of it as in opposition to Judaism. And that isn't how Paul conceived of it, but it is a product of what Paul conceived. So in that sense, Paul is the founder of Christianity as we know it today, but he did not originate the religion. The religion began with these guys before him who were people he knew. Like, he met them personally, ultimately, not right away, but eventually he met them and had a détente with them and created some sort of diplomatic relationship with them so that their churches could unite. But that's the, the what do you call it?
No problem.
Shell person. I can't think of the what is the word? Nutshell. That is the nutshell story.
That's the nutshell answer to
there you go,
his question. Well, I hope that. So we got Dan from Dear Christians podcast. He asks, would you consider someone who's trying to follow the philosophy of Christianity and the teachings of Jesus to be a Christian if they don't follow him as God?
So that'd be like a pragmatic Christian, I guess, like maybe Jordan Peterson. He's kind of a pragmatic kind of Christian.
Well, I wonder what is the question exactly, because you can frame that as there is no God, and therefore you're a Christian atheist, which is a thing. There are people who are atheists but believe in following Christianity culturally. Or you can say that Jesus was a representative of God, which would have been Paul's view, incidentally, and the apostles before him. Jesus was an agent of God, sent by God to instruct things, or inspired by God in one way or another. But he was an ordinary man, in the ultimate sense, or at least at one point, right? Like he lived around. He was like an angel embodied in a human body, kind of thing. But you could go and not even buy that and just say that Jesus is just an ordinary person who got right. Like you could pitch it that way, but still believe in God, right? So you could say that Jesus is still teaching what God wants to be taught, but Jesus himself is not a God. Now that's a different kind of Christianity, which is a known heresy. There have been Christians who teach that as well. I don't know if there are any sects, the organized sects today, that teach that specifically. I could be wrong. There's like 10,000 sects. So I don't know if that relates to the answer.
Yeah, actually, I think you covered it. In fact, the Christian atheist thing is actually pretty interesting. Let's see what secular rarity asks. In terms of toning down the Christian nationalism in the U.S. right now, Dr. Carrier, do you think it is more helpful to point out the lack of evidence for Jesus or flaws with his message? Oh,
definitely don't approach. So I wrote a whole article on this. You can find it on my blog, where it's Finca is Right, is the title of the blog. And my position is, don't use mythicism. That is not an evangelical argument you should be using to argue with Christians. The only way they can accept even the idea that Jesus didn't exist is if they've already agreed that the religion is dodgy and unreliable. So like you have to be out of the religion to actually objectively examine this. So I say, if you're arguing with Christians, or if you're trying to persuade Christians of something, always argue a fortiori, which is the idea like grant some things, like just for the sake of argument. Just say, we're not even going to challenge that Jesus existed. In fact, depending on what your goal is, you could say, I'm not even going to challenge that he wasn't inspired by God, wasn't resurrected, right? Like, let's just look at what's in the Gospels. Like, you can say, like, let's just grant all these things to you, and then say, like, from within your perspective, you should agree with these things, and why don't you, right? Like, and go through the Gospels. Like, that is a more effective way if you want to get Christians on your side on political issues, rather than, like, if your goal is to convince them to not be Christians, then you should go at much easier to prove things. So, like, for example, that the resurrection is not a believable thing. So like the resurrection debate is much more like grant historicity, go at the resurrection, go at argument from evil, like go at things that are way, way easier to prove very conclusively, in my opinion, if that's your goal, is to get them out of Christianity. But if your goal is to, you don't want to make them unchristian, you just want to like get them to where their Christianity is going. Say, let's just assume those points are true, and then look at the character of Jesus in the Bible. Now, if you look at it literally, it's not a great character. But you can have this conversation about like, well, let's put away the negative points. So even if both of you can agree, you and the Christian, that that's not a great image for Jesus, so we'll not follow that. But then you go to other things that he says that are really good. Listen, like, why don't you follow these things? Why aren't you doing? And the prayer, why are you against Jesus himself, your own God and Savior, on the public prayer issue, and then like in the helping the poor and all of this stuff? So you can, and it's more effective to change a political position or ideological position with a Christian by arguing from within the beliefs they already have, rather than trying to like go right at them like, oh, there wasn't even a Jesus, right? Like you've lost them the moment you said that. So even though it could be correct and defensible, that isn't relevant if your goal is otherwise. If your goal is to simply get them to change position politically in values and be a more less toxic contributor to society, and someone who's actually going to move society forward and help the world, help the downtrodden and so on. As we've said here today, more Christ-like things. You can argue from within their belief. That's the much more effective way to argue if that's your goal.
Now, as somebody from the Coast Guard, do you answer questions from people from the Army? I got to check first.
Is that Jim Hall? Well, that would be Marines. He would have said Marines. No. Yes, of course.
So Captain Dadpool asks, what is Dr. Carrier's take on Josephus, I believe, mentioning of James, the brother of Jesus, and later James being executed and Jesus being made the high temple priest? Is this the same Jesus?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of confusion in there. So only one passage in Josephus mentions Jesus, supposedly Jesus called the Christ, having a brother at all, much less named James. And so there's this one passage in Josephus that's unrelated to the other passage, which Jesus Christ as the Messiah, etc. That other passage is obviously a forgery. I have a whole article on it on my blog if people want to really dive into that. I don't think it's defensible at all as anything Josephus wrote. But there's this other unrelated passage in a completely different book of his history where he talks about this James character who gets killed, executed extrajudicially, and the Jewish elite gets outraged by his killing and depose the high priest who instigated it and replace him with another man named Jesus. Now that Jesus is obviously not our Jesus, it's a different Jesus. Jesus just means Joshua, by the way. So it was one of the most common Jewish names of men at the time. So like lots of people were named Jesus. It's not unusual. It also just happens to mean Savior of God, which is a very convenient name for a Savior of God, just saying. But there were actual Jews who were named Jesus. So that wasn't weird. So anyway, in this story, there's this story about this happening. And there's two words in Greek. It says, this is the Jesus. James is the brother of this Jesus who's called Christ. My view is that those two words were added later, that they were not written by Josephus, and that originally this passage had nothing to do with the same Jesus that we're talking about. It's a completely different Jesus. It was that other Jesus who got appointed to the priesthood after, to avenge his brother's murder, basically to mollify his family. He was made high priest in replacing the guy who killed his brother, basically, is what happens. The straightforward political story, we see this kind of feud management a lot in the way governments are managed. But that's my view. And if people want to know why I think that is, I think there's good evidence for this position. I've published a peer-reviewed academic article on it. And if you look in Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ, which is my book that has all of my peer-reviewed papers and stuff on this, as well as other articles, it includes this research as to why this is the case. But other people who really want this to be authentic say like, well, this proves that this is a historical Jesus, because how could he have a brother named James? Right. So that's where the debate stems from that. I think that's what they're referring to here. But so it does come down to the question of whether those two words in Greek called Christ were written by Josephus or not. And even if that's the case, it could be that Josephus misread his source, because all baptized Christians called themselves the brother of Jesus. Sure. They were all the brothers of the Lord, right? By baptism, you become the adopted son of God. So therefore Jesus is the firstborn of many brethren. This is what, Paul says. So Josephus might have even written those words and still misunderstood what that meant. right? So he might have mistook it as a biological relation when it wasn't. I don't think that's what happened. I think the words were added later and by accident. Actually, I don't think they're added deliberately. There's a long explanation as to why that is. It actually happens commonly in manuscript transmission. We have tons of accidental insertions into manuscripts. But anyway, that's way too long answer to that question.
No, you're fine. Now, you being out there on the West Coast, are you a college football fan at all?
No, if I follow any sport at all, it would be roller derby and sometimes hockey.
Oh, then that's okay, because you're not going to offend Spartan theology here. He's a
okay.
South Carolina football fan. But so Spartan asks, let's see, Dr. Carrier has he read Chris Tilling's book, How God Became Jesus, and what does he think of this strong view of the Trinity?
No, I haven't read that book, so I can't comment on that.
Yep, and go Clemson. Let's see here. Oh, and somebody's doing some promotion for you. After the show, check out Dr. Carrier's blog. Link in the description, guys. So thank you, Secular Rarity, if anybody wants to go and follow Dr. Carrier's blog right there. And I don't see any more questions. If I missed any, I apologize. Repost them real quick. If we got 5 more minutes, I might pull one up. Eddie and Dr. Carrier can close out the show right here.
So it is time for the hard questions, Dr. Carrier.
You're right.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Yes. Okay. What is the last song you played on your iPhone?
Oh, that's going to be really weird. So
I'm not telling you mine.
Well, it's a long story as to why, but Killing Strangers by Marilyn Manson.
Hey, I like some Marilyn Manson.
Yeah, I do too as well. I've just recently found some of his stuff that I was not into before, and so I've been getting more into his musical composition. The way that he structures songs actually is impressive.
Yeah, my last song is 3 hours of sleep music because I'm a scatterbrain. I'm ADHD as can be. So when I go to bed, all of my great thoughts come, and
right.
Yeah, I have sleep meditations, and sometimes I'll go through the whole list before I'm finally asleep because my brain just it goes. That's when my best creation comes or
no, that's not unusual actually, so
really?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
No,
I know a lot of people, like there's in the shower is another place that suddenly people get insights, and it used to be me. I used to be like that. I don't get the insights in the shower so much anymore, but for a while I had waterproof pads that you could write on. And I still do in my shower. So any guest who visits and has an idea that comes to their head, there's a waterproof writing pad that they can put in the shower.
Awesome
So yeah, but me, it's just in the car, right? So driving, I have thoughts, and sometimes I have to pull over and write them down. But usually, I'm good at at least retaining some of them, and so that when I get to my destination, I've got to write these things down before I proceed. But I like driving, and I do a lot of long drives, especially now. So yeah, that's a meditative experience for me now.
Yeah, the shower thing, I would say most of my thoughts, if I'm being transparent, if I had any good thoughts, they would probably be immoral. So I don't write much down in the shower.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right.
And I'm really going to tell off on myself again here, that I actually have I drive a service van, and I have kind of a shelf that I made here with a notepad, and now I keep my eyes on the road.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I've done this too, while you're driving, writing.
Right, and I love.
I'm good. I don't even need to look. I don't have to look at my writing. I can write, which is why I used to like the original phones that had keypads, right? Because physical keypad, you could you could text and drive more safely when you didn't have to even look at your phone. That used to be a thing, but that we don't do that anymore. But
so iron charioteer. I'm I'm from the South.
Iron charioteer. They defeated God. I'm assuming that's a reference
Yes.
to the biblical passage.
So how Gnosticized? Well, he's a he or she. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to assume, but is a regular. So I have to read the question. How Gnosticized was Jesus? In other words, did Greek pistis sophia influence the Gospels? And for those who aren't familiar, pistis was the Greek goddess of loyalty and trustworthiness, and Sophia was divine wisdom, I believe, in a feminine.
There was a Jewish tradition before Christianity, and you see it in places in Christian sectarianism in the early years, of Sophia being the reference to the Holy Spirit as the wisdom of God, as a female person.
Right.
So that is a thing that occurred. Pistis actually just is the Greek word for faith. You mentioned loyalty. It actually means faith, trust, any kind of trust or relying on.
You heard it here on my podcast. Okay, I have been fighting this battle for so long, Dr. Carrier. There is a fallacy of etymology, but etymology is important. When we're talking about ancient words and they're trying to describe things in their language. And pistis meant trustworthiness. It didn't mean
it's having trust, confidence, reliability. These are all tied together. That's a concept back then.
I love you.
But to get to the question, I'm gonna really blow people's minds if you don't already. My real fan, I guess, hardcore fans already know this, but I actually don't think Gnosticism existed. The Westar Institute agrees with me, which I was really astonished to find, which goes very much against type because they're very liberal Christian minded, and Gnosticism was such a useful construct for them. So for them, even them to admit, the evidence doesn't indicate that there was Gnosticism. I have an article on it, so people want to understand how could I say this? This is impossible, right? I have a whole article on my blog. You can go there and just look up Gnosticism on, search it in the search screen.
Definitely.
But it is a disciplined position. Basically, and I was realizing this as I was doing my research project, my postdoc on the historicity of Jesus. And so I was so gratified to see that when my book came out at the same year, Westar came out with their report. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's what I was thought too. And you'll find in my book on the historicity of Jesus, I never mentioned Gnosticism. It's not in there. And the reason is that I wasn't comfortable using it because I wasn't confident that it existed as a thing. And then the Westar Institute came out with its report, and I was completely concurred with their report on this. So what we mean by Gnosticism is a modern Western construct. It is a scholarly construct of the 20th century. And it has this list of beliefs that constitutes Gnosticism. All of those beliefs existed, but no sect had all of those beliefs, and every sect had at least one of those beliefs, right? So it is not a useful distinction anymore. And if you want to understand why and all of that stuff, you can go look at my thing. And it had a lot to do with mistranslating. But in the ancient Greek, in the texts, when Christians are complaining about Gnostics, for example, like Hippolytus and these other, anti-heretical writers, what they mean is literally they mean Christians who claim to know things. They're just talking about and it's just a shorthand for these Christians who claim to have spiritual knowledge that we don't have. Well, they'll turn around and say that we do have spiritual knowledge. It's just different knowledge than what they're claiming, right? So everyone's a Gnostic. So it's just a question of these guys are just the bad Gnostics. They're fake Gnostics. It's really but we're the true Gnostics. We have the true spiritual knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So if you understand in the dialect and the context of the time, Gnosticism wasn't a thing. So let's change that question to how much did a lot of this mysticism, Jewish mysticism, which is a much broader, real subject, influence early Christianity? And I do think there is some influence there, like this idea of, I think, like you can look at Paul's chapter, 1 Corinthians, is it 10? I think it's 10, where he talks about Christ as the rock that the Jews follow, this magic rock.
Right.
And if you don't know from the Bible, like you look at Jewish lore up to that point and around that time, there was a lot more lore about this rock than you find in the Bible. Right. So it was called Miriam's well, for example, which means Mary's well in Christian speak. It's the same name. So they called it Mary's well, from which water flowed to feed the Jews. And this rock magically hovered before them, and so while they went through the desert, while they're going from Egypt to the Promised Land. And so this magic rock, which was called Miriam's well, followed them, and out of it came water, and so that fed them and fed the flock, essentially. So you can see in this a lot of metaphors that the Christians are borrowing, right? So Jesus flows from Mary, right? Well, Mary's the mother of Jesus, right? And so there's a lot of these things that there might have been we know there's a lot of mystery teachings that we don't know what they were because they were kept secret. Paul references some of them, but a lot of them he says he's not going to talk about them. We get some of this references in Ignatius and others. He says, I can't talk about these things. There's some secret teachings. So we know there were secret teachings. We don't know what they are. And I think speculation is idle, so we can't just declare things. But it's possible that there were teachings about Sophia and its relationship to Jesus cosmically, and that there might be a feminine spiritual power might have been integrated into their cosmology. That's entirely possible. We have hints of it in some Christian sects. But it's all lost, so we can't really reliably reconstruct first century doctrine on this. So a lot of that stuff was floating around. To answer that question, it just wasn't Gnosticism per se. I would avoid using that word. There's a bunch of different ideas. Some may or may not have been involved in this or that sect. It's much more complicated and messy. So
you see me grinning because are you on TikTok?
I am not, no.
you have got to get on TikTok. So, Hyperhumanity, who has thousands of followers, and he calls himself a Gnostic, and he debates Christians about God, or the Christian God being an evil God and killing and persecuting Gnostics and things of this nature. I'll stay humble about it. Anyway, he talks a lot about Gnosticism and what Christians did to them and things of this nature. And even had debates on it. And we've gone back and forth about, the Gnosticism thing. So you heard it first here, Hyperhumanity. Dr. Richard Carrier, you don't exist, Hyperhumanity. So they are dying to know, what are you drinking, Dr. Carey?
Yeah, there's been multiple questions about that. It's going to be a very unsatisfying answer tonight. So I've been sampling the Kirkland Scotch.
Ooh.
I have no idea what it is, because if anybody knows, Kirkland is the Costco brand.
Oh, really?
And what Costco does is they'll buy usually a high quality stuff. So for a longest time, and possibly still, Kirkland vodka is actually Grey Goose vodka, but you're not supposed to know that, right? So it's like Kenmore vacuum cleaners used to be Whirlpool vacuum cleaners. They would just put the Kenmore label, which was the Sears brand, on, and then sell it for less. It's the same stuff. They just sell it for less. So Costco has these Costco brand, the Kirkland brand liquors, and so they have a vodka, they have a tequila, and they have all of the things. And so I got this scotch, and there's actually two. They have two Kirkland brand scotches, and they're different. And for a while, they had one that I'm sure was Macallan, because it really tasted like Macallan. This I can't figure out what this is. I have no idea. It's definitely not Macallan. I can tell you that. It's not bad. I mean, it's a decent, affordable scotch. It's not like a high end. It's not Lagavulin, It's not Lafroig, but
I love the humility. That's so I learned the hard way that just because scotch costs more doesn't mean it tastes better.
It really depends on what you get, right? And it doesn't have to be single malt. That's another thing. People are obsessed with single malt.
I was going to say, I actually paid almost twice as much for Johnny Walker Green.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Black. And I like black much better than I do green.
That makes sense, actually. No, I do. If I'm drinking scotch, I'm usually, it's either Irish whiskey or it's legitimate scotch, like from Scotland. There's some exceptions. I like Basil Hayden. So
I am straight from the South. It's all bourbon all the time. I'm drinking. If anybody cared, I'm drinking Jefferson's. Okay, Jefferson's is good bourbon.
You know what? I don't know that one. How sweet is that? Is that like a sweet bourbon, or where would you put that on the galaxy of bourbons?
More on the sweeter side.
Okay, so that's probably not my thing. I like more of the scotch. Like Basil Hayden is a good example. It's more like a scotch. than, for example, Maker's Mark, which is super like way too sweet for me.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's a little, I would say maybe a little bit sweeter, but smoother. So
where
it's
does it land,
not-
like with respect to Bullet? I used to live in Ohio, so I
yeah,
drank
it's
Bullet
way
a lot.
better than Bullet.
Okay, no, that's
Yeah.
high praise.
Yeah,
Yeah, good to know.
I would put it up above Maker's Mark. Maker's Mark's a little bit more sweet, but it's a little more harsh. So
Yeah, I agree.
It's this one is probably a little bit more sweeter, but it's so smooth that on the rocks it's fantastic.
I'm actually gonna look for that. So what was that again? That was
It is Jefferson's, and you can actually get this is the very small batch, but you can get Jefferson's, I forgot what it's called, but they actually they barrel it on ships. So every bottle is just a little bit different than the
far
other
out.
bottle.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
intriguing.
and it's not, it's middle of the shelf. It's about $35 for,
Well, that's what I like. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, Top Shelf is great when it's on its occasion, but no, I like good, like reliable, affordable,
Right.
decent liquor.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So Pasta Mike, who was generous enough to produce this for us and does all of my logos, my background, the introduction. How awesome was that introduction? He turned me on
great.
to Angels. Oh, I can't even think and remember the name. I'm sorry, Pasta. It's Angel something, but it's bottled in port wine barrels, or finished in port wine barrels.
Mhm.
And it is phenomenal. It is Pasta, you're gonna have to help me, homie. Where you at? You're hanging me out to dry. It's
I saw
Angel's Envy. I think.
So it's Angel's Envy. It's
Yes.
Angel's Envy. No, I don't know that one. Yeah, someone in the comments said, like, what about a whole stream to just talking about different liquors? It reminded me of for those who are interested in how to pronounce all the scotches, just Google Brian Cox, that's Cox, the actor, if you know, from X-Men and various other films. Brian Cox, the actor, and Scotch. And you should find a website where there's like 100 clips of him. And all he does is he just takes a sip of Scotch, of whatever brand it is, and pronounces it correctly.
Hey,
and that's
we
it.
have our very own. We have our very own. His name is Jim Benton. And he does Meaning Forge podcast, and he will show you, Pasta's seen this intimately up close and personal, how to properly taste bourbon.
There it is. That's it. Yeah, Brian Cox drinking Scotch. Yeah, okay.
Shout out to Brian Scotch at the what is it? He's on
Brian Cox. He's been in a million things. He's a well-known actor.
Oh yeah, he's a funny guy. I like him. So okay, we're gonna wrap this up. And the last question that I have, I'm gonna steal one from Pasta Mike, because Pasta Mike is kind of like my mentor.
How dare you? How dare you say that?
He's my younger, bigger brother. So he's like 7'8",
much younger as well. Make sure
he's like 7'8", 400 pounds. So
really.
This is Goliath here. We've got some exaggeration, I think.
That's right. Yeah. So what is your favorite ice cream?
Wait, you're asking me my favorite ice cream?
Yes.
So I'm lactose intolerant. So the answer is none.
What's your favorite frozen yogurt? Or can you?
I don't. Actually, I'm not a dessert man. I don't really drink. I don't really consume any of those things. So I don't have a favorite of those things. If you were to ask me my favorite dessert, it would be something like strawberry rhubarb pie would be an example.
Dr. Carrier, I am so disappointed.
I
I was such a fan all the way up until this point.
I don't do ice cream. I do sorbets, but I don't have like a favorite. Like I don't go around and like picking
sorbets are hard to have favorites. So
well, what's your? Let's play devil's advocate. And in a God world, what's your favorite natural disaster? That rascal God throwing out natural disasters at the world.
Are we talking about like ones I could think of, or ones that have actually been proposed?
Yeah. So is it like a tidal wave or earthquakes? Which one do you
You know,
like?
I actually no. Here's what my answer. Well, the flood, and here's why. Because you know, there's all these cultures, ancient cultures, had a flood myth, and my favorite one of all of them is the Chinese flood myth, because in the Chinese flood myth, the humans win.
Ah, got it.
Because the myth is, you know, God is angry and is flooding the world, and so humans built dikes and dams and engaged hydrological engineering and defeated God. And I'm like, yeah, those are my peeps.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my favorite one. You can beat a flood, submarines, ships, ducks, like, you know,
That's true.
Fish are fine. Yeah. So like, flood is a much more survivable.
Yeah, as a
disaster.
theist, I have a few bones to pick with God too. So
Hey, you've heard it here first, folks.
Dr. Carrier, I am so humbled that you have joined us. Thank you so much for coming on here.
It's been fun. Thanks for having me on. I've
been awesome.
loved the conversation.
Yes, I've had a great time. I would love to have you back sometime, for sure.
Of course, yeah.
And talk more maybe about your work. I'm kind of a rambling on kind of guy. So
well, I think it's valuable to, like, rather than talk about the same subject, I would do a million shows on Jesus mythicism, for example, but to talk about what our views are on things and common values and where we are in things and life history and stuff like that. Always valuable to discuss. So I don't consider it a distraction at all.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And that was kind of my goal with this is, you know, there are so many debate shows. There are so many. I wanted to have because this is, I have a podcast platform that sends it out to all the major platforms. And I wanted to get to know the academics, the philosophers, the historians, who they are, what kind of person they are, because you guys have to talk so much about the books that you've written, the positions that you have, and it's, you know, and it's on and on and on. And I want to know more about you. So that was kind of my idea behind.
And thank you. I appreciate that, because, you know, it does sometimes get tedious coming on. You know, I enjoy talking about the things that I've written on and so forth. Yeah. But yeah, if it's the same thing over and over again, right? But getting personal, getting into like these life experiences and how we got to where we are and where our ideas land in the real world. Right? Like, you can get into the abstract, you can talk epistemology, you can talk metaphysics, you can talk theology, right. But where are we in terms of the ideas that actually hit the pavement and actually affect how we interact with people and how we're trying to make the world better if we can.
Absolutely. And I agree 100%. That's why I think you and I have the same bane of existence for presuppositionalists.
Oh, because I avoid them mostly, frankly.
I want to find a common ground.
You know, you say that, but we could do a whole show on the one productive thing from presuppositionalism. And that's saying a lot.
That is saying a lot.
and I suppose I'm being unfair to like Victor Reppert and so forth, which they take the argument from reason, which is not presuppositionalist. It's very important. It's an empirical argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they did ask interesting questions. They just come up with the wrong answers. And I think it was valuable. Like, I found it was very valuable for me to tackle their approach to things, because in the process, I thought through, for example, intentionality is a philosophical concept. Now, that's something you have to look up. It's a weird technical term. I never sat down and thought through that as like, how does physicalism explain intentionality? Now, you can explain it, and it's actually fascinating, like how you can explain it. But I wouldn't have gone there had I not been trying to counteract this kind of apologetic. So when they ask interesting questions that you haven't answered before, like the ontology of logic, where does logic come from? Why is logic true? That's an interesting question. Now they're using that as a cudgel to try and force.
Right.
So anyway, there are useful things you can get out of presuppositionalists, is what I say. But very rarely.
And for the atheists who have to face somebody with the presuppositional logic is nominalism. That's the magic word. You're a nominalist. So,
Well,
thank you so much.
Yeah. No, I'm an Aristotelian nominalist, which is a whole other thing. But that's for another time.
Well, hey,
but
I like the philosophical. I'm all about some philosophy. We can definitely do this.
Yeah, I would love to talk about what are abstract objects. You could do a whole thing on that. And
universals and abstracts. There we go.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's been lovely.
Absolutely. If you have to go, I understand. If not, I will talk to you in the green room behind the doors.
We will.
I'm going to see everybody out here. Thank you so much again. I am so humbled by you coming on here and giving us your time and telling us so much about you. Thank you so much, Dr. Carrier.
All righty. Yeah, it's been excellent. Thanks for everybody for showing up too. Love it.
Absolutely. Wow. Dr. Carrier. You know, when I had sent him a message, I'm a theist. He's an atheist. He's an atheist, I would say, probably activist. I think he identifies as that. When I sent him a message, it didn't take him, I think, 6 hours to respond to my message. And he was gung-ho from the beginning. And I am so humbled by his willingness to come on to this show, being as new as it is and as small as it is right now. And so I am so thankful for Dr. Carrier, coming on here and bringing all these viewers. Thank you, everybody who showed up here, all the questions, all the chat. It is such a humbling experience, and I am so thankful for it. Before we go, I want to say thank you, Pasta Mike, with Normalizing Atheism. I consider you a mentor. You have taught me so much to get me to this point. I've learned so much about production, editing, whatever. You get the point. And on-screen performance. You guys have no idea how much time Pasta Mike has spent with me, coaching me, proper etiquette and questions and things like this. And I am so indebted to him. Thank you, Oz, over at Tang and Tart, for being, an inspiration along with Pasta Mike. You guys are the ones who really got me into this. So for future episodes, like I said at the beginning, I'm going to work more on production skills. I want to get some layman philosophy series going and things of that nature. Spend a little bit more time with the family, try to balance the time out. But I am so thankful and so happy for everyone that was here. Thank you for all your comments and activity and everything you do. Have a great night.
Hey, again, thank you so much for joining the stream. Don't forget to go into both streams. We've got Normalizing Atheism and Brute Facts podcast up. Like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Go over to the links in the description. Dr. Carrier's blog and book links are in the description. You can actually hop on over and support Dr. Carrier as well. Thank everybody for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
Shame, think something new under the sun. You can't take back some things you already done. No, you blame things that